This past Sunday, we looked at the book of Ruth. And speaking of Ruth, I wanted to ask you a question. If someone were to ask you, who is someone great, a well known, famous person, how would you answer that question? Well, chances are that you and I, we may answer that differently than some others out there in our world. But nonetheless, I think a common answer that we would find is people would name athletes, musicians, maybe even some politicians. But I think we're going to see in our text today, God sees it differently. So I'm going to read from Ruth chapter 4, verses 13 through 15. And here's how the text reads. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. Then he went to her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The woman said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." What we just read, we hear that Ruth was better to Naomi than 7 sons. And in the cultural context, that's an astonishing statement. It was the sons that were the key to carrying on the family line, to working, to providing in the long run. And then the number 7, represents a complete and perfect family. And yet, what we read tells us that Ruth was even better, better than 7 sons to Naomi. And it all started because of her willingness to serve sacrificially to a destitute and helpless widow. Do you at times sometimes measure your worth based upon what others define as being great? You may serve in very unnoticeable ways. It could possibly be at home with your kids. It could be a kind word to someone. It simply could be making yourself available. And those acts go unnoticed to many, and many wouldn't necessarily consider those great. But we have to be careful not to define greatness by how those around us in our culture do. Ultimately, God's vote is the only one that counts. And God sees our little acts of service, and He calls them great.